Take a moment and think back to when you were a student, walking the halls of your school. Chances are there was a few teachers that stood out to you. Maybe they challenged you or encouraged you, or simply made you feel like you belonged. Have you ever stopped to wonder why you feel that way, and why those teachers had such an impact? I'm Dylan Letcham, and today joining me are my co-hosts,
Rida Sayed,
Sarah Von Zubin.
This is The Learning Lens, a podcast dedicated to exploring theories, ideas, and practices that shape how we teach and learn. Today we're talking about humanism, an educational theory that focuses on the whole person, not just academics. In this episode, we'll be looking at what humanism is, who helped shape it, how it shows up in education, some of the strengths and criticisms. Let's jump right in. Rida, can you give us a bit of an overview of what humanism actually is?
Yeah, of course. So humanism is a learning theory that became popular in the 1950s as a response to early theories such as behaviorism and psychoanalysis. This helped shift the focus away from simply observing behaviors or examining unconscious drive. Psychologists like Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers believe that learning is about much more than just memorizing information or changing behaviors.
Maslow and Rogers. They're always connected to these learning theories in some way, I feel.
Yeah, I know, right? So instead of just memorizing and changing behaviors, it was more about focusing on the person as a whole. So specifically recognizing how students' emotions, relationships, experiences, and overall well-being played a vital role in the learning process. Humanists believe that people are naturally motivated to learn, grow, and reach their full potential. Humanism views students as active participants in their learning process who learn best in supportive, student-centered environments where they feel safe, respected, and valued.
Okay, I see. So when we embed humanism theory of learning into our classrooms, we focus more on our students, like as a whole.
Exactly.
Okay.
Kind of we're giving them a choice in how they learn. Students know themselves best, and their learning should reflect that.
That's really cool. Okay. But just to kind of rewind a little bit, humanism, did it start with Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow, or?
So it actually didn't.
Oh.
The idea of humanism stems from a few different places. It was first discussed in the 5th century BCE with Plato and Socrates. Those guys, they always bring up everything, right?
Nice, yeah.
And was again brought up in the Renaissance, so in and around the 14th to 16th century CE. The modern humanism that we talk about came up in around the 19th century, although it had a lot of competition with physical and social sciences coming to the forefront of our minds. Sartre's humanism lecture, Existentialism is Humanism, in 1946, told us that we are not responsible for just our own selves, but for all of humanity. This led Heidegger to writing his letter on humanism, which ended up kind of throwing a wrench in humanism itself. He kind of made like an anti-humanist movement, because he said that instead of humans being autonomous, they are shepherds of being, which kind of means that our goal should be to watch over the world and act as the people who take care of all things truth and meaning.
Oh wow, that's a lot of history in a short time frame.
I know, a lot of people, theories, and ideas to wrap your head around. We could talk about it for hours. But I really want to learn a bit about humanism and education, though. Dylan?
I thought you'd never ask. My bread and butter. So what does this all actually mean for teachers? At its center, humanism is really about seeing the student as more than just a learner. It's about recognizing that every student comes into the classroom with unique experiences, cultures, emotions, and interests. Hart argues that education should support the growth of the whole person, intellectually, socially, emotionally, and ethically, not just focus on academic achievement. When students feel safe, respected, and genuinely connected to their teachers, it puts them in a way better position to learn. The idea is also echoed by Hewitt, who explains that humanistic teaching encourages students' choice, goal setting, collaboration, and self-reflection, while positioning the teacher as the facilitator rather than simply someone who's delivering the information. We look at this as the guide on the side versus the sage on the stage. As I started looking closely at the word humanism, I noticed that a lot of our conversation was traced through the history of Western thinkers, eventually, humanistic psychologists like Maslow and Rogers. But that raised a question. Is that the only history of humanism, or is that just one particular history of humanism? I would like to introduce today's guest, Dr. Kenneth Jamara, an assistant professor at Ontario Tech University. His research really explores decolonizing, anti-colonial education, African Indigenous ways of knowing, and issues of equity and representation in the classroom. Dr. Jamara, welcome to The Learning Lens.
Thank you very much, guys, for having me on this podcast.
In your recent article, It Takes a Village to Raise a Child, Sankofa, Ubuntu, and Ujamaa, as counter frameworks of anti-colonial education. You explore how African-centered philosophies such as Ubuntu, Sankofa, and Ujamaa can challenge some of those colonial and individualistic ways that we currently look at about education. What I found particularly interesting, though, for the topic at hand was the description of Ubuntu, which you describe as a distinctive form of African humanism. For somebody maybe encountering Ubuntu for the first time, would you be comfortable with sharing how you would describe the philosophy and the way it understands to what it means to be human?
Yeah, sure. That's a very great question. Ubuntu is a Bantu word, which is also a philosophy that loosely translates as I am because you are. And it is also translated as a person is a person through other people. So what Ubuntu tries to communicate or show us here is that whilst as individuals, our individual agency is important, through that African-centered lens, there is, as humans, we are relational beings. And so thinking about humanism from that distinctive African lens that I talk about in my article, what that means is that being human from the Ubuntu perspective is not just about you, the individual. The center of it is community. The center of that is relationships that we forge with people. And so when we think about Ubuntu as a philosophy, what it teaches us is mutual care. So if we even think about that phrase, which is I am because you are, what that actually unpacks is that I am not really full as human without you. Look at it as our human body. We have different parts of the body and they all work together. So it's the same thing. We depend on each other. So what Ubuntu teaches us is that we are not on this journey alone. We are not living in isolation, but we need to think about how our world or how our lives depend on others. And so in that way, what Ubuntu teaches us is that there is more importance when we all work together.
Thinking more specifically about the classroom, what benefits could an Ubuntu-informed approach have on the classroom culture and student sense of belonging? As we know, culture plays a very important role in how the student navigates the learning environment. How might educators begin to engage with these ideas without simply treating it as like another framework to add on to what we're already doing?
Yeah, I think this is also another important question. So in the article, I unpacked how it is important for us to look at schooling and the school system. If we look at learners within a classroom as a community, what that does is that it pushes us against this individualistic competitiveness of how even we structure assessment. Most of the time when we think about assessment, we may not always center the growth of how students themselves within that learning community pushes each other, But what Ubuntu can come in here is that when we begin to see learners within the classroom space as a community, then we may have to think about how are they influencing each other or supporting their growth as a journey of all of them working together. It's about supporting each student in a way that fosters growth and help them to think about others as not their competitors. So even in terms of pedagogy, if we begin to see that classroom space as a communal space, then it will be important for us to center the diverse ways of knowing and being of the learners, and not also see these learners through a lens of deficit, but seeing them as people who come with some cultural and communal knowledge system that are still relevant for what we teach them.
Dr. Jamara, I know you're an incredibly busy person. I know you contribute to a lot of different areas, such as your research and your writing, but I really did want to take the time to thank you for lending us some of your knowledge and your perspective. You certainly give us a lot to think about, for sure. Thank you again for joining us on The Learning Lens.
Thank you for setting that up, Dylan. Mm-hmm. So now that we've learned about some ways that humanism is viewed in different parts of the world, let's look at some of the data in our own backyard.
Okay.
So this got us thinking. We wanted to hear from teachers themselves, so we sent out a short Google form asking educators, and let's take a look at what they had to say.
So we asked about 10 questions in our survey, and we're just going to read results of some of the questions that kind of stood out to us. So one of the first one was question number 3. How strongly do you agree with the following statement? Students learn best when they feel safe, respected, and valued in the classroom. So about 85% said that they strongly agreed, 7% said that they strongly disagree, and 7% said that they agree, which is interesting to see. One of the other questions that stood out was question number 4. How often do you provide students with opportunities to make clear choices about their learning? So these can include choices of activities, projects, or assessment formats. 42% of them said that daily or almost daily. 50% said about 1 to 2 times per week, and about 7% said that less than once per week.
It's funny, like I wonder how many people are actually doing it more than that, and they're not really associating that with an intentional, choice.
Yeah. Which also leads us to a third question that kind of stood out to us, which was question number 7 in our survey. So we asked, in your opinion, which factors has the greatest impact on student learning? 100% of them said positive teacher-student relationships, which is really nice to see.
Good.
And then about 78% of them said a supportive classroom environment. About 28% said student motivation. 42% said peer relationships. 57% said family support. And the lowest number we had was 21% saying academic instructions. And last but not least, 42% said student choice and autonomy. Yeah, so it was interesting to see, and I'm glad that so many people took part in the survey. It was an awesome way to learn about how humanism is seen in the classroom today. I actually did some research into some of the strengths of humanism. Would you guys like to hear what I found?
Yes.
Yes, please, yeah.
Okay, so according to PACE, one of the biggest strengths of humanistic learning theory is that it focuses on the learner as a whole, rather than just on grades or test scores.
I love that.
So humanistic educators recognize and understand that a learner learns best when they are given the opportunities and a safe space to succeed. So if a student feels emotionally supported and has a positive relationship with both teachers and peers, they are more likely to feel confident, take risks, and engage with their learning. Another key strength of humanism is that it emphasizes on intrinsic motivation. So it encourages students to learn because they are genuinely interested in what they are learning and see its value rather than learning for grades. It also encourages self-reflection, creativity, independence, and student choice, all of which help encourage learners to become more engaged and take ownership of their own learning. What we see in the classroom today practices is that such student-centered learning, personalized instruction, and social-emotional learning is based on these humanistic principles.
That's amazing. I think in order to get like a well-rounded perspective of humanism, were there any like critiques of it as well?
Womp womp, I know I hate to say it, but there have been some different critiques of the types of humanism
Let's
throughout
hear it.
history.
Lay it on us, Sarah.
Alright, so humanism has in the past been connected to anti-religiousness, which some people really thought was a no-no. Some criticism of humanistic education also discuss how humanism puts too much of an emphasis on student emotions, when in actuality, the main focus of education should be on children's cognitive development. Another critique is that applying humanism in the classroom may make classroom management a little bit more difficult, and let's face it, it's already hard to manage a room full of students. But applying a theory may lead to less structured learning environments and reduced respect for the teacher.
Right.
I think that this criticism, like in my own opinion, is based on the idea that teachers should be highly authoritative figures instead of facilitators of the learning environment, which is a little bit outdated. The last few critiques are that humanism can be difficult for an educator to implement because it depends on educators knowing the students, attending to their personal needs, differentiating instructions, and building strong relationships with each individual student. And those are all things that can also lead to strong classroom management, though, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
But is it realistic for us to be able to address our students' emotional needs while also meeting all expectations curriculum-wise?
I think that's an interesting question. And if we refer back to our questionnaire, number 9, what is the biggest challenge to creating a student-centered classroom? 78% said time constraints and student behavioral needs. So a lot to balance there.
Yeah, it is an interesting question, and it's so hard to fit everything into the year as it is. But it is a part of our job as educators to help balance student emotions in the classroom on some level. So many facets to teaching that we never thought about before becoming a teacher.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there really is so much to think about with this topic.
So the end of it all, humanism really emphasizes self-actualization and self-esteem, emotional development, and personal growth.
Yeah.
All things that are really important in helping our little learners develop into the self-actualized good people that we help lead them to become. And I think that we can take a lot of what we learned here and bring it into our future practices in the classroom.
I think so as well, absolutely. Well, thank you again for Dr. Jamara for being our special guest today. And thank you to all of you, all of our listeners, for taking the time to listen to our podcast today. Join us next time as we discuss behavioralism in education. Thank you for looking through the learning lens with us.
And remember, every learner sees through a different lens.
Mhm.